We've yet another exciting session coming up, but before we get started, we'd like to take a moment to thank every one of our sponsors, speakers, and partners. Without them, we wouldn't be able to bring you this incredible event. Don't forget, speakers are going to be answering your questions, so be sure to ask your questions and get advice from the true experts in the field, tailored for you. Next up, our panel is addressing creating a successful product function, structuring, scaling, and team building. Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to our next panel discussion. It's great to have you back with us if you joined us already today. If you're joining for the first time, welcome to the CPO Festival. It's great to have you with us. I'm going to do a quick couple of housekeeping announcements and then we'll dive straight in. So first of all, if you haven't already, make sure you join our Slack community. So this is a free Slack workspace with 7,500 other product pros in there. So if you want to get involved, go to productledalliance.com. You'll find lots of other content there, but you'll also be able to jump off and join our Slack community. What else will you find? Well, there's reports, white papers, research, there's courses, there's membership options. There's absolutely loads on there, so do be sure to check that out. We do also have our in-person CPO London Summit that will be taking place in a couple of weeks' time on December 1st. So if you're going to be local or if you want to travel to come and join us, then please do check that out. You can go through productledalliance.com and go through the events and look for CPO London, and hopefully we'll see you there. Now, we're going to move into our next panel discussion, and there's a couple of housekeeping announcements. I'll invite our speakers to join me on camera, and whilst they do that, I will let you know that we have one speaker who is running slightly late. That's Vishal Kapoor. So Vishal will hopefully be dialing in shortly, and when he does, we'll bring him into the conversation. We may also be joined by Shishab Agrawal from Google Payments Compliance. So hopefully we may be joined by them shortly. But in the meantime, Pooja, Konstantin, would you like to join me on camera? So as mentioned in that intro video there, we're going to be discussing creating a successful product function, structuring, scaling, and team building. So a really interesting session. I'm looking forward to this one a lot. Before we dive straight into the questions, I will just ask you both to kind of briefly introduce yourselves so we know a little more about you. So Pooja, maybe we could come to you first.
Sure. Thanks for having me here and looking forward to speaking today. So about myself, so I currently run product at Providence. And here we are doing some interesting work in terms of incubating new startup ideas, as well as scaling our existing business lines to support the growth of the business, as well as just using technology as a growth lever. Prior to this, I was a general manager at the Alexa Smart Home Devices organization, where I built a product and a program management team to identify, incubate, and launch new smart home devices. And this is where one of the products, or the flagship products that we launched, was the Amazon Smart Thermostat, which we built in partnership with Honeywell, and has been a very successful product overall. It's 4+ stars on Amazon.com, which is a benchmark for successful devices. And then just prior to that, I was more in the media realm, where we built experiences where Alexa could work with TVs and other media devices. You could say, Alexa, play Game of Thrones, and through the work of our team and some of the other partner teams, we were able to play that onto your favorite device, living room devices. That's about me. Overall, like 15+ years of experience in tech, working from engineering to product with an MBA in between. And I'm a busy mom with 2 kids, 6 and 3.5. So, work-life balance is always a challenge, but I just love doing what I do. And that's why, I'm here today to talk to you all about it.
Perfect. Thanks, Pooja. And yeah, I can empathize with that. We've had a 9-week-old baby recently, so yeah, I'm fully aware of the joys of trying to work and parent at the same time. Surely, and apologies to the audience as well. I'm always very aware people talk about Alexa and say, "Hey Alexa, play Lord of the Rings, play Game of Thrones," that they may well be setting off devices. You may well know whether or not that happens better than me, but if your Alexa is talking to me right now, you'll know why. And thanks, Pooja. Konstantin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Hi there, Konstantin. Can you hear me okay, Konstantin? It looks like we've got you back with us, Konstantin, I think. I can see you moving.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm glad to be here. And I do. Do I have any problems with my connection at the moment?
Sounds like you might have a little lag, but I think if you just go for it, Konstantin.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Seems something seems to be wrong with the connection to Big Market.
So I'm
Yeah,
just going.
sure. So okay. So hey everyone, thanks, and I'm very glad to be here. I'm a product director of growth in PandaDoc. That's a company that provides signatures and services related to electronic documents. I'm working in a growth function, managing PMs across acquisition, activation, freemium, and also partly responsible for the sales funnel. And essentially, my work is related to growing specific metrics within the company. Before that, I was also a head of product for a division of a big corporation, a local network, a local social network, where I was managing PMs, user researchers, and product analysts. So in general, I'll say that I'll keep it brief because I like to spend more time on talking about the specific points that we have for today.
That's great. Thank you very much, Konstantin. And it seems to be working. I think there might just be a little lag on your line there, Konstantin, but I'll give a little pause after my questions and we'll let you respond to them. But it looks like that lag may have shortened a little. So the first question I had for the team, I should also let the audience know we hopefully will be joined by Vishal shortly. So if you see him join in, I'll get him to introduce himself when he does. The first question was really around the idea of creating a successful product function. And the first key part of that is building your team, right? So you've got to identify that talent, you've got to locate new talent, and how you go about that. How do you identify that talent? Is it exclusively about prior experience for you? Is that what you're looking for? Or are you looking for kind of soft skills, transferable skills, and then seeking to retrain potential hires? Pooja, if we come to you first on that one.
Yeah, sure. A lot of it depends on the type of the role that you're hiring for, the level, the responsibility, and the riskiness of that role, right? And at least when you're looking for new talent, as you know, like the best chances of success are typically somebody like who's within your network. Either you've worked with that person, you've mentored that person, or you get a warm referral. But a lot of the times you also have to look outside your current network because you may be looking for specific expertise that may not be within your network. So we there's a bunch of work that we do with recruiting to make sure that we find the right candidate. But there has to be a degree of connection to the role. And I'm going to come to soft skills, but before that, there has to be a degree of connection, whether it's a domain, whether it's the function, whether it's the platform. So all those things are considered, again, with the axis of what is the riskiness of role. Now, we do look at soft skills, like all these things, some of these things can be learned. As I said, right, the domain can be learned, the platforms can be learned. But if you're hiring somebody at like a director of product level, it might be a little bit, it depends upon what you're asking that person to do. And are you asking that person to grow the team, or you're asking that person to kind of deep dive and figure out growth? So that's a different skill set needed. But the things that I definitely look at from a soft skill perspective, and I think some of these are non-negotiables, are communication, influence, ability to influence, intellectual curiosity. Like those three things are extremely important for PMs, and I think those are very transferable. And on top of that, because I've built like devices, and especially if I'm hiring for devices, I look for grit. Like, how has this person done in like stressful situations, especially because hardware development has a lot of ups and downs. So can this person survive the 2 or 3 or 4 years of R&D cycle and then going ahead and launching a product? So the things like that I look for, but definitely it's not only about the past experience, it's a mix.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you. Konstantin, what about you? What are you looking for? How do you identify it?
Well, I definitely agree with Pooja that depends on the seniority level, because as more senior you go, you typically expect more achievements under the belt and more specific examples and the case studies from the person's portfolio. So essentially, as the more senior you are, the more expectation there is that you've actually delivered something measurable. But going into like specific skill sets or the ways to evaluate a candidate, I'd say that for me, there are 3 categories. Like, first part is like behavioral achievements, and you typically want to see that the person had some measurable impact on what they did, right? But the second part, which actually can sometimes substitute in the past behavior even for the senior candidates, is the problem solving skills, right? So it's another part, and it makes basically some skills transferable, because if they have a lot of experience with certain areas, but they haven't specifically worked on that part that you're seeking for, but maybe they can show within an interview process that they possess the intellectual curiosity that Pooja mentioned, which is like very important, and which it's quite often those things kind of leap out to you quite fast, because even before you ask questions to understand like how intellectually curious a person is, you will typically learn it. But at the same time, can you give this person a problem within the interview? Can you give them a case and ask them to walk you through their thinking, and you'll see whether this thinking is kind of aligned with the way you solve problems at the company. It's not a complete substitution for the behavioral part, right? So it's not a complete substitution for the experience that they have, but it can definitely substitute for a small part, like when you are not sure that the candidate will be able to, fulfill the work. You just, try to understand like how they would approach a specific problem. And then, of course, there is this category of personal and soft skills. But this part, I think, mostly depends on the company, because it depends on what kind of environment do you create for PMs. So for some companies, that would be a lot of resilience, because you're going to have a lot of pushback on everything that you do, and everyone will have like competing priorities, and you will have a lot of internal competition for the resources. But at another company, it's just going to be structured in a different way, right? So it's very adaptable to the kind of to the company you're at, and to the specific thing that this company has. And with achievements, like the first category that was really important for me, and I mentioned, there is like, a small problem, because through an interview, some people know how to game this part. And I'm sometimes very skeptical of certain achievements within in CVs, because, well, it's not something that you can check for. In a very smart candidate, that candidate can like write whatever they want, and they can provide you with a logical explanation of how they achieved that. And sometimes it's even true, but the problem is it's due to organic growth, right? The companies grow on their own, especially when the markets grow, and sometimes the improvements happen because just the organic growth is high, or because of some other contributions that the company had at this point. The fact that you were responsible for a metric and that this metric grew doesn't mean that you were directly responsible also for its growth, but it's so easy to game. And you need to really balance those like behavioral parts, and kind of look for specific ways they wanted to achieve, how they approached that as a challenge. If they were unsuccessful with moving the metric, but they had a very strong framework, that's should be enough, in my opinion, because not everything is structured in a good way in most companies. Sometimes you're working against, the headwinds, but, just show this logic as much as possible. And that's like what makes or breaks the candidates for me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really good point that, when you're evaluating these soft skills, and even some experience and things like you're saying, you've got to find different ways to do it. And I'd be interested in your take on that, Pooja. How have you approached that?
I think it's a very similar tactic, and also a little bit of it depends on the company as well, because some companies do look at only like past experiences as an indication for how you'll be successful in those roles. Some of the companies look for more like solve a problem within like 20 minutes. And I think there are pros and cons of both the approaches, because a lot of the problems, to be honest, that PM solve cannot be solved in 20 minutes. So I actually see, like, as the candidates get more and more mature in the function, they actually struggle with sometimes the interview process in these problem solving things, because they're like, oh, I have to like think about so many different things now, because now like I have to think about X, I have to think about Y. And I think that when you put a senior level candidate in that mold, he may not come out successful, right? Because he's thinking out so many broad things. So I think in that case, the insights that you're looking for perhaps becomes more important, or how he's trying to solve becomes more important, rather than just the problem solving itself. So pros and cons of these approaches, but I've seen companies kind of adjust some of these things based upon the role and based upon, I think, the feedback they get. But either ways, these are the skills that the PMs need. They need problem solving skills. They need behavioral skills. They need to figure out like how to work with teams at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's another interesting point is kind of, if you know what you're looking for, how do you align the company around what the core competencies that you're looking for within PMs are? Because you might have one group that has one idea, you might have another person who has another idea, and you want to make sure those all line up with each other. So how have you gone about making sure that all the hiring managers that are evaluating in the same way or comparable way, and they're all aligned on what the core competencies they're actually looking for are? Konstantin, do you want to offer on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I recently had a project related specifically to that. We've been analyzing and reworking the way we hire people. So I've heard a lot of murmurs within the company that some of the hiring practices that we have may not be ideal, right? So we've decided to treat hiring PMs as a product itself. So basically, I've gone through the phase of discovery and then to like brainstorming, or before that, prioritization of problems, and then the solutioning phase. And essentially, we've learned a lot of different problems that we have with hiring, because we've learned that we are not aligned on the process, and different hiring managers had their own processes. We've had different ideas on what kind of competences we are looking for in candidates. We've come across situations where it was hard to move PMs across the company just before they were hired for a very specific job. And now we can't really offer them some other opportunities within the company just because the strategy has changed and what they've been doing is not something that we want to pursue. So essentially what I've done is I've run interviews with all hiring managers at the company to understand those problems, and then also to get their ideas of what core competencies are for the company and what are the personal traits that make people excellent at the company. And essentially after that, I was able to just prune this into specific categories. So we've identified core competencies and meta competencies. And for core competencies, there were things like analytical thinking, product sense that goes from discovery and to kind of solutioning. And then the last part on execution and leadership, like stakeholder management, execution, ability to organize a group of people. And the meta skills were related to, first of all, communications and structured approach. And this is something that I want to give a note to the previous conversation that we've had. I quite agree with Pooja that sometimes it's not important that they solve a problem, but rather that they present a structured approach to solving a problem. It's just not important that they really know what's behind this problem, but rather that they know how they go about solving it. And essentially, if they can do that, if they can structure a problem within this short amount of time, that just shows that they have this potential to be the problem solver at the company. So back to the question, we've identified those core competencies, we aligned on what they are, and we've built specific framework to guide interviewers on how they should rate each candidate. So there could be a 0, 1, or 2 points, depending on the candidate answering some of the questions, presenting evidence from the past, or solving problems as related to the competence. And then we want to just give ratings to those competences before those people could move into a pipeline, within the pipeline to a later stage. One thing we've introduced, and the way we want to check for those skills, is through peer interviews. So essentially, there is always an urgency bias for any hiring manager, because you have like this new shiny thing that you need to work on, this new specific achievement. And we've definitely had some issues with urgency bias when we hired people real fast, and then we're thinking, was it a good hire? Was it a bad hire? Should we have waited a little bit longer? And essentially, by introducing peer interviewers before the hiring manager, we are both checking for core competencies from the people who are going to be their peers. And then also we just remove this urgency bias, because the hiring manager just doesn't see the candidate before it happens. In that way, it was very important for us. Like, the main finding for me, that those projects are very important and they should be reassessed like on a yearly basis, maybe more often, but I don't think it's feasible to do it more often. But the main part is that when you make that explicit, it then follows into much more directions that you evaluate firstly, because it definitely rigged into how we think about what our product management team should be capable of, right? Because there are huge matrices, like Reforge has a matrix of 12 skills for PMs, I think, but it's just unfeasible to find candidates that are strong in each of them, right? And they are probably not suggesting that we do that. We really need to know how we operate. For example, for a company, it might be important to have PMs who are very strong in go-to-market skills for one reason or another. And for another company, they have a strong marketing, product marketing, and GTM motions. And they're like, yeah, we are not going to check that. We don't need that. We are going to support PMs with that specific function, with those specific skills. What we care about is like discovery and delivery. And maybe sometimes you come to a conclusion that what you need to have is the feature factory. Well, I'm not talking about our company, but at the same time, I definitely can see it working for some companies. If you can establish a cycle of discovery and delivery that leads to a huge amount of valuable features that you can sell, and your whole company can support that through like sales-led motion, through marketing-led motions, that could be an answer to some companies. But until you make that explicit, until you talk to all hiring managers, until you talk to CPO and CTO and the CEO to understand like their thinking on how they are evaluating candidates right now, because everyone has those evaluation points, but they are implicit. When you make them explicit, it creates an internal alignment and a way to move forward, not only in hiring, but also in how you structure teams, in how you work with PMs, in how you grow PMs, in how you onboard PMs, in how you evaluate PMs. So it actually opens this box.
It's a whole system.
Yeah, it's a whole system. It's a whole like box of Pandora. When you open it, you realize that with those insights, you'll have to adapt in more ways that you expected to. And this like project on the recruiting part is something that's just goes much deeper, and then you see other projects spinning out from that. And that was a very important exercise for us, because we haven't done that before. We have never aligned on the core competencies. We've just assumed that for growth, the hiring manager will just do their own thing. For core, the hiring manager just will do their own thing. For platforms, the same, right? But now we are more aligned on what kind of PMs we are looking for and what we are going to support them with.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's it sounds like a really interesting project, and I'm sure it's made much more consistent decisions as well. Pooja, have you Have you had any work in that area, trying to align across organization what we're looking for, how we evaluate it, and try and bring in that level of consistency? Have you done any work around that?
Yeah, I think in my current role, it's a little bit of a work in progress because we're still like flushing out like what the future looks like. But in my past roles, like at Amazon, it's a pretty well-defined process where like, like what Constantine mentioned, like about the core competencies, about the leadership principles. So there's a lot of consistency there. Do I think there are gaps? And like definitely, right? Like there are gaps. And I'm sure like our HR does like a wonderful job of reevaluating this. But I think as an organization, I remember having a conversation with my manager at some point where we aligned on, despite of like what the interview process is, which is standard, there are like these three things that I definitely want to judge the candidate on, right? Like although this was not what we discussed, but I'm just going to give you a hypothetical. Like in the past role we worked on hardware, right? So is the candidate like comfortable with handling wiring, for example, right? Like that is a very specific role related thing. It's not required anywhere else, but like in this case, it becomes pretty important that you understand like, oh, this person is going to pick up a screwdriver and is going to go and like open like their thermostats or things like that and be comfortable. So this is not something that is going to be consistent across the organization. So, and same thing, like perhaps somebody working in AWS would also need like I would call it that role related knowledge, and role related experience is going to differ across the companies. But then there is like there are like standard set of competencies that like perhaps more established companies have a more of a homogeneous approach to some of these things. But as I mentioned, there is like every organization has some level of heterogeneity that is required.
Yeah, absolutely. Konstantin, did you have anything to? It looked like you were building on that point a bit.
No, I quite agree that sometimes you just have hard boundaries, especially when you're looking. So, for example, you are never going to hire a director of product for, let's say, growth or some very specific function, a person who had no experience in the area. It just doesn't make sense. When you hire some people, you are looking for a particular expertise, and sometimes it's just not enough that you are a great problem solver, that you are intellectually curious. You do need to have this experience with you that you're going to bring to the company, and not maybe even for the sake of improving something, but just to be aware of how it works. Because I guess Pooja would have been able to onboard a person, even if that person had no experience with hardware, but it would take them like half a year. That's just too much, especially for fast growing or like companies that really operate on a fast basis. That's just too long. You can't do that. When you hire people, you're all evaluating what kind of ramp up period would that person have? Because typically when you hire candidates, you really haven't planned for that candidate to appear before the job appears, right? So essentially, quite often you need that person real fast, and you haven't sometimes even planned for that role before. And this amount of ramp up is not just something you could have. It's just the reality of it.
Yeah, it goes back to what we said, the riskiness of the role, right? How risky is this role, and how that candidate will perform for the level of risk required. So I think it goes back to the conversation we had before.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to broaden out a little bit. So we've talked quite a bit about, looking for that individual person. You've identified a need within your organization. We need this type of person. These are the core competencies. We've defined them. We know we're consistent. This is a hiring decision. But is there a broader perspective in terms of kind of actually structuring the function? So, what do you consider around which roles do we need and how do they interact with each other, and what the balance between them should be? Maybe you could reflect on what the ideal would look like, and then maybe if you were starting from scratch, and then maybe what sometimes the realism demands of the situation as well. I don't know who wants to jump in first on that.
Oh, sorry, was it meant for me? Sure. So it's just such a complicated question, to be honest, because you can definitely categorize some types of PMs, but it just go way beyond that. So I think that, for example, Reforge has it defined as core work, product market fit expansion work, scaling work, and growth work. But there are much more. It just doesn't lend itself to be structured that easy. And depending on the stage of the company, whether you're a small startup, a complicated corporation, somewhere mid-size, how often you change your strategy, and what your strategic priorities are for the quarter, for the year, for 5 years, you're just going to be building it in a different way. And there are, of course, different leaders with different ideas on how to structure certain things. So, for example, growth, which is a function somewhere in the product, in another company might be a function of marketing for different reasons, and they will treat growth as something completely different from the company that has it as a product function, and that works across product-led acquisition, activation, and those things. Another company that would be marketing. Otherwise, you just start with a problem. Every PM ideally drives certain outcome. Sometimes you don't have a quantitative measure for that outcome, and that's fine. You don't have to have quantitative outcomes every time and everywhere, but you start from that, and then you see how those group together to establish an organizational chart. Ideally, the less overlap between people you can have, the better, just because it will create unnecessary competition. But in very big companies, that's bound to happen. It's just something that is bound to happen. And the smaller companies, you may see much more generalists, I think. But then again, big companies are very keen on hiring generalists as well. So, it's just such a fluid topic, and it just can be structured or approached from so many different ways that it's better to be, looked at from a case study perspective, so to say, because it's just something that you will have to work on, and you can't really rely on, for example, we are a company of 1,000 employees. I can't take Amazon structure or Google structure and just apply it to the company. It just won't work. It's just not possible to structure it in this way. And Google, vice versa, they can do the same with our structure. They just can take it. A company that has a very small but very important distinction from ours, even though it might be very similar to our company, they might have a completely different structure, because the way they prioritize certain outcomes or certain goals would be different from the way we see them, right? And the way we see where we could drive results, because organizational structure is a function of how you set goals and what kind of things you want to achieve. And you start with that, and you just go into org design. I'm very curious on what Pooja has to say about that, though.
Yeah, I think it becomes, I think when you are in a startup mode, I don't think it's a problem, because everybody literally is doing everything. Your PM is basically doing marketing, your PM is doing project management. Obviously they're talking about roadmap, but they're everything. But initially in startup modes, I would say even in established companies, there are a lot of the times that you seed an effort with just one person. And that person, although there might be support roles around that person, but there's a lot of you have to do a lot of jobs at that point. It becomes a problem as soon as you start to scale. And I think at that point, I have seen organization grow from 4 PMs to 50 PMs suddenly, within 6 months. And all of them, they're working in their own silos around different teams or different domains. And then on the other hand, I've also seen organizations where product itself is its own organization. And then the previous model, as I said, was more where you have everybody engineering, product, and everyone reporting to one leader together. So all of them are working on the same goals. And on the other side, product is reporting to a product leader, and they work with XFN folks across the company. I'm sure there are like other structures available as well, but like it just depends upon like what works best for how you're thinking about your future, like your 3 years, 2 years, 5 years. And again, like if you are from a startup, like that 1 year runway is very much important than your 3-4 years. So you have to organize in a way such that you can do more with less, right? Because means there aren't a lot of resources available. And I believe in established organizations, HR could help as well in terms of org design. But again, when we're talking about startups, you have to like sit down with the CEO and kind of say, okay, this is the need and this is how we want to organize, and think about like how do we scale the business. So it just depends. And by the way, these structures are very fluid, right? You can I've seen people try it out one way and then like switch to another structure because it was not working for the organization. Is there change management? Yes. Is there expectation resetting? Yes. All that needs to happen, but at the end of the day, you have to kind of storm and form to some stage till you get to a level where you think that okay, the organization is doing well and you're kind of marching towards your goals, how you've set up. But then again, like maybe after a couple of years, you might have to storm and form again. As the product becomes more mature, you have to maybe seed some other efforts on incubation, which may be a totally silos team. So it just depends on like, I'm 100% like in alignment with Constantine in terms of like, what are your goals? What is the level of scale that you're looking for? I don't think there's like one model for like scaling that fits all, but just remember, doing more with less is the name of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So Constantine, go on, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention like this part on scaling. Initially, when you answered the question on how to structure a team, the scaling part comes second, but it's very important, especially for startups, because Pooja mentioned like 2-year cadence of changes, but sometimes it happens like each half a year,
right.
And that becomes a very painful moment for the company. It starts like from the organizational design side of things, because there are a lot of overheads that are being created for any organizational change, because not only you are like changing the product function, but it also impacts engineering, it impacts other teams, and you're just going to have to create a lot of change management unrelated to the things that you're doing. But another part is that your team that you have already, they may not adapt very well to this scaling part, because some people are great within the startup stage when you're doing everything, but just aren't really adaptable to a situation where they are getting support from other functions now, and when they are not working on everything and everything all at once. And this creates problems, because sometimes scaling not only about like hiring or creating different organizational structure, but also about reassessing the current people. And that also takes time, because you'll need to realize, okay, what do I do with the existing team? How do I make them perform at the best possible way that they could, and also keep them interested? Because if you've been the whole life in startups and you want to work on marketing, on product, and sometimes tinker with code, maybe if you're a technical PM, and suddenly you're not doing that anymore, that might create some problems, because those are people who started with you. Do you really want to, just say goodbye to them at this point? No, that creates a lot of, not just stress, but, internal turmoil that you have to take care of. And this is a very hard topic, and the one that you probably have to find an answer by yourself. Like, what are your values? What are you going to do about that? How are you going to treat that as a situation? Like, that's a very important part of the scaling.
Absolutely. And so we're just over halfway, but I just want to bring in an extra couple of opinions on this. So we're joined, as you'll see, by Vishal and Shisha. So would you maybe briefly just introduce yourself, and I'll give you a quick catch up and ask you to join in the conversation. So Vishal, would you mind a really quick intro?
Sure thing. Thank you for having me, James. Seriously apologize for being late, but better late than never. I'm a director of product at Shipt, and I am responsible for the shopper side. Shipt is a shopping and delivery marketplace, and I'm responsible for shopper earnings. So every dollar that goes into the shopper's pockets is through the products that I own, as well as I own another product, which is the best way to describe is Uber Pool, which is, you're going from point A to point B. Can we give you multiple shops at the same time around the same neighborhood? Overall, the products have impact in close to $1 billion for the company. So a lot of power, a lot of responsibility, a lot of stress, a lot of fun. And previously, I was at Lyft, I was at Zynga, I was in gaming, I was in other marketplaces. Excited to be in this space and excited to be part of this audience.
Thanks, Vishal. And Shishir, do you want to give us a quick intro to you yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. And first of all, thanks for having me on the panel. And again, apologize for being late to this meeting. I was caught up in some other meeting and I couldn't get out of it. Yeah, just as an intro, I'm Shishir. I am head of product for what we call as payments platform compliance area within Google. And in a nutshell, my charter is to make sure Google stays compliant to payment regulations. And as part of that, I focus on building products around money laundering detection and also what's called as screening. So essentially keeping sort of Google's ecosystem compliant against all these regulations that are out there. Before that, I spent a few years in Google Cloud. Prior to that, Oracle and Juniper. But overall, my expertise or experience is more in the enterprise B2B space, focused in security, infrastructure, and payments. So.
Great, perfect. Thank you very much. So just before, you're not a problem being late. We know how these things happen in the virtual world, so not a problem at all. Thanks both for joining. And before you joined us, we were just kind of discussing the impact that scaling has on your product org. So when you're growing and how the requirements and how maybe the structures need to change in the org. So it'd be great to get your reflections on your experience of that. So maybe Vishal, if you want to share, have you got some experiences of how you've had to change a structure maybe during a scaling time?
Yeah,
we're putting you on the spot there. I know.
that's fine. I'm not sure what Konstantin and Pooja covered, so I'll just share my thoughts. I hope I'm not repeating them. But yes, so I think one of the things that I like to do, we like to do at the company, especially when we are growing teams and when we are growing product lines, what we start from, we follow an OKR framework like Google. I think Google also follows OKR. A bunch of other companies do. We follow that. We start with clear goals and we start with clear objectives, right? Like these are your metrics, clear metrics and clear goals as to what you're trying to hit. And I think at that point, then you kind of decide if, you need to have multiple sort of people, kind of like going and whittling at the problem, if you will. Like if a metric is hard to move, something like user retention might be hard to move, right? So then do you want to have a specialized team? Do you want specialized people to actually focus on that? Of course, it is a decision that happens with executive leadership, right? With my boss and, especially when you're deciding to fund and resource, you have to actually get buy-in from different functions at the company. We are a very, very collaborative, cross-functional company. Operations, for example, is a big partner for us. So operations team would also have to have some non-zero. Besides tech, there is also a big non-tech component because we are sort of an on-demand marketplace. So they would also have to allocate some non-zero capacity because the needle wouldn't significantly move if you're only trying to solve problems using algorithms. It doesn't work like that, right? So you also need humans, etc. So for us, first of all, the way we do it is first we align on what are the numbers. Second is what numbers do we want to hit. And then from that point, we say, yeah, this is significant enough. We don't think that we can hit it independently as one team. We probably want to divide and conquer. So let's split, let's resource and let's kind of go from there. So so that's sort of the general rule. That's sort of the general principle that we follow. But you're right, as businesses grow, the Uber Pool case that I was talking about, it's called bundling. We call that bundling. Within my time at the company, it went from something like, a low single digit percentage into something like 40-45% of the orders are bundled today. So it was massive growth in 2 years. And obviously, as that grew, we specialized into, bundling for one type of product, bundling for the other type of product. There's a different PM for each of them, right? And we kind of like grew the teams. We kind of put, And the use cases started getting more and more complex in that product versus this product. So we kind of split them out and grew the product like that. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vishal. And Shisha, I don't know what your reflections on that. How have you seen structures be required to change as an org has scaled?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to what Vishal was saying, right? So I firmly believe that sort of structure follows your strategy, right? So you need to sort of have a strategy in place, and that strategy, especially in this world, sort of constantly evolves, right? But it's always important to go back to your strategy and make sure your structure is aligned to the strategy. So in my case, for example, when I joined this team, I had 2 PMs, and I grew that team to 6 PMs. And along that journey, what happened was, like, initially, sort of everybody was working on everything, but as we fleshed out our strategy, we figured out that we need I have 2 product areas, and within that, figured out we need somebody who can focus on the core platform. We actually also have big investment in operations, and we have a review tool. So it turned out like we have certain goals and OKRs for the review tool, and we needed a person who can focus on moving the needle on those goals for the review tool, right? And the third person was more around what I call as sort of horizontal. It's more integration. So how do you work with different customers and make sure that what we are building as a platform and the review tool can be easily used by our customers, right? So like this structure, for example, on day one was not there, right? So as sort of the needs of the business evolved, as the strategy evolved, the structure evolved with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to touch on as well was, I know product managers spend a lot of time thinking about onboarding their customers. And I thought it'd be interesting to take that a different way and kind of talk about onboarding PMs themselves. So, when you're building this team, you're scaling, you're bringing these new people in, you've identified the need to scale, you've identified the people you want to bring in, but how do you actually go about doing that? Like, what's some top tips when onboarding PMs when you're going through that scaling journey? I don't know, Pooja, maybe we'll come to you first on that one.
Sure, happy to do that. Like, honestly, I think in my past teams, and in my current role, I think what has worked well is making sure that, of course, we have like the 30, 60, 90-day plan that is standard that you give to the PMs. But I think what is one key here is making sure that you kind of give them runway to learn, right? The new business. The second is about establishing those relationships, the XFN relationships that they will probably be working with. Like it's a different thing that you put it as a part of the plan, but it's a different thing that, you make those warm introductions such that people, even if they're busy, they're going to take time to talk to this person. So I think those are the two. And the third thing I would say is identify a clear win within the first 90 days that this person can achieve. Whether you are a junior PM, senior PM, director, everybody, when they're put in a new job, they have to, it's a new ground, and you have to kind of build confidence. And the way to build confidence for people who work with you, for you, is kind of trying to get them that win, such that then, like, once they have that win, you will see them rise and shine like anything. But it's super important to actually get that within the first 30, 60, 90-day window.
Absolutely. Konstantin, I saw you come off mute there. Did you want to add something in on that?
No, that's a great answer. That's what typically we try to do with PMs within their 90 days, to set up certain goals that might be easy to achieve, might be even a carryover from someone else, but we'd like them to have something analyzed, something researched, and something delivered. So they kind of, work across the whole cycle of the PM work, and where they will get first results themselves, first insights they themselves uncover and not hear from someone else, first features delivered. And maybe those are like really small but it just doesn't matter because PMs are like results junkies. They are builders. Well, it not goes for everyone in product management, but typically you see how people burn out when they don't really get the outcomes, or even when they just don't get outputs, right? When they're like stuck in a position where they can't deliver, even though they've been researching for so long and have this great product strategy, when they can't execute, when they can't, just do their job. And essentially, you have to give them the runway. That's 100%. And there are great opportunities or ways to do that. Buddy system, onboarding programs, like deep dives into the product for the first 1 or 2 weeks, training programs, those are great. But I completely agree that navigating people to achieve something very early is the best you could do for their success at the company. And of course, the guidance around people, because forging relationships is not always about just talking to people and getting to know them and aligning on the expectation, but also some kind of internal knowledge on like who likes what and who drives what goal and who's what's important for whom. So you have to be in sync with your new PMs much more often than you are with the existing PMs, just because they need those support structures much more at their first days than everyone else. But you have to kind of tip it off. You have to start meeting them less and less and provide them with more autonomy and responsibility, because as much as they're product builders and result junkies, they are also responsibility and autonomy junkies, and you have to show them how you're going to give them this responsibility and autonomy as time goes by.
Absolutely. One of the big changes that people have experienced when onboarding recently in the last couple of years has just been the element of remote that's sometimes involved. I don't know the exact setups, and it seems like every company has a different way of doing remote, hybrid, in person, etc. now, which I think is great, but obviously it brings unique challenges. So I don't know, Vishal or Shishar, if you have experiences of onboarding people either fully remotely or partially remotely, and any tips for anyone in the audience who are trying to do that.
Yeah, I can take it first. My team is fully remote right now, and I hired them through COVID. I built the entire team through COVID, which was a unique experience for me, a unique learning experience for me in and of itself. I think I will build on what Pooja and Konstantin just said. So that was a great answer. I think you need to give somebody clear goals, right, so that they can actually achieve them. And I think achieving and delivering is something that PMs live and die by, right? So it's very thrilling for somebody to feel like they are adding value, they mean something, and all of us find that fulfillment with work. I will add two small things to it though. It's when it comes to onboarding, whether it's remote, whether it's in person, one size doesn't fit all. Meaning, different people learn in different ways. So one thing that I've observed, having managed a bunch of PMs by now, is somebody wants to be more, somebody is more brainstorming. They want to come and bounce off ideas with you. Somebody else is just leave me alone, right? Like, I want to work in my own corner and I will come back and show you when I'm done. So you can't have like one plan of onboarding for everybody and just kind of go and impose it. You actually have to figure out. That's where I think this is more of an art than a science, is you have to figure out like who learns best in what way. Ultimately, your goal is to empower them and help them find their voice. And I think as a manager, right, one of the things that I strive to do is, foster this sense of psychological safety. So it's important to deliver, no doubt, right? Like when you deliver, you feel like you're adding value, you're part of the company. But I think it's even more important to feel that you belong, to find your voice, right? Whether you were able to deliver something or not, depending on, if you were in a challenging area or not a very challenging area. Some areas you deliver incrementally. You can deliver a lot. You have a lot of, especially in user experience, you can show a lot. But if you are working in a machine learning team, you probably can't. But I think the whole idea is, yes, we can put the 30, 60, 90. But at the end of it, do I as a manager, everybody when they come into a company have, I would say, even speaking for myself, have some version of, am I getting this right? Like there's some version of imposter syndrome. Am I doing this right? Do people like me, right? Like, am I fitting in or not? It's always the case. We are all humans. So for me as a manager, right, at the end of it is making them feel like we bet on you, we hired you. So, we have trust in our decision, but now you need to trust us. You need to trust yourself and build that empowerment and build that psychological safety in the person. So yeah, there are plans. There are plans. Obviously, we have We have ways of making people get there. But if they falter, or if the ways don't work, depending on the situation, then you kind of have to adjust the context. But I think just very quickly, James, it obviously helps to meet in person. I think there was a stat that I had read somewhere a long time ago, which was, when you text with somebody, you only get 10% of the conversation over text. When you talk to somebody, you're getting to about 40%, right? So almost 60% of that body language, your warmth, your aura, and all of that is lost when you're not actually interacting with somebody in person. Absolutely. Like, one of the goals that I try to do is, as soon as somebody's hired, within a month and a half, if they can make one trip, or if I can make one trip, let's just get a coffee together. We don't have to talk shop, but let's just, connect as two people, just connect as humans, and then go from there. So those are the things that I've used, especially in this new reality. And that's where I am. Shishir, would love to see what you try.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of good points are already covered. I think the only thing I would probably add is, I think there's also sort of a realization to reset maybe some of the expectations, right? Given this virtual environment, right? So even though all of us are used to this notion of 90 days, right? I think we need to be cognizant about that this new world is all remote and virtual, and it definitely takes more time and effort on both the manager and the PM to make sure like that person is sort of aware of the culture, how things get executed, how to build the right relationships with the stakeholders, how to even have an impact, and sort of be flexible in terms of like, maybe it's not 90, it's 4 months or 5 months, right? So just allowing that room, in my opinion, for that individual to get all the right support and build that confidence, I think is important, right? And one of the things, for example, I have done, which is not so much different in virtual environment, probably even more important in virtual environment, is so we actually do like have a buddy. Whenever somebody new joins, we give them a buddy. A buddy is more of an informal sort of mentor where they can coach or guide this person on how things get executed and how do you write a good PRD and stuff like that. And then you have sort of a mentor, which is more of a domain expert, right? So, and that person can help more on like ramping up on the domain and other things. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really good tips. I worked fully remotely before the pandemic, so I've worked fully remotely for about 7.5 years now, and I would definitely agree with you, Vishal, that meeting someone face to face in the early days makes a huge difference. I've been in roles where that's not happened, and I've been in roles where it does, and it really makes a huge difference. So I'd definitely encourage everyone to try that if they haven't already. We literally have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to maybe do a quick round robin and ask you to keep your answers to maybe 15-20 seconds each. Just one key takeaway, one top tip. If you could only have our audience take away one thing today about building a team, about scaling it, about structuring it in the right way, what would it be? Who wants to be brave and go first?
Go ahead,
Pooja.
Go ahead, Vishal.
Go for it, Pooja.
So one thing is that, what's very important for your team is that not everybody might be the right fit. And when I say fit, they might not look like the product. So, I'm a leader who leads from the heart. So it's a big part of product management and building your teams is to help those other people that are on your team to identify that why, such that they are also leading from the heart. So that is my one tip to take away to the audience, that as you are growing your team, think about that mentorship, think about that, how you grow your team to kind of rise and shine. And it may not be within your own organization, it might be somewhere else as well.
Thanks, Pooja. Vishal, go on, you go next.
Yeah, I think I would double down on that. I would say don't lead by, frustration or desperation, lead with inspiration, right? If people see the way of why you're trying to do, if they feel empowered, if they feel safe, ultimately, you're as a manager, especially, your goal is to achieve outcomes by empowering other people. And there is a lot of synergy that you can get when you can't solve all problems by yourself. But when you bring this diversity, this talented pool of intellectuals together, it can really do magic. So work on that, work on grooming your team, fostering your team, and empowering them, and the results will basically show for themselves.
Great, thanks, Vishal. Konstantin, we'll come to you next. What about one top tip you could share?
Yeah, So it would probably be make it explicit. So whatever you do in terms of the organizational structure, either you're hiring candidates and boarding them, like scaling your org design, you should really make it explicit so people feel comfortable with what you do, so they can understand where it goes from and that they're aligned on what happens. And you should really show the logic behind it and the work done for it to kind of happen. So make it really explicit and work on it as if it is your product as well.
Great. Thanks, Konstantin. And last but not least, Shisha, do you want to share one top tip?
No, I think I'll just give maybe a tip on hiring that I tend to use. I think sort of be open to hiring different sort of PM talents in your team, right? Like many of us could have a mindset of, like, this is how we got to a PM and how we grew in our career. In all fairness, I think there's no one size in which people get into a PM role. And especially, like, I think Vishal talked about diversity. So, I mean, having a diverse set of backgrounds within your PM team, actually, I think really elevates the team's impact and output, right? So, like, maybe be more open to hiring sort of maybe unconventional folks who might not have a core PM background or even a domain background, right? But maybe they are in operations or a strategy, and they are just so good at solving problems and looking at things from a customer perspective. And you would be surprised, or I have been surprised to see like how you bring in some of those people and they bring in really good insights around solving problems and building really, really good products, right? So take some risks in terms of hiring PMs and not have sort of maybe an unconscious bias, and encourage and build a diverse team.
Yeah, absolutely. Take some risks. I think that's a great note to end on. And thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I think there's lots of really useful stuff for our audience in there. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So I'll say thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our audience as well. And we'll see you in the next session in a few minutes. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have happy holidays, everybody. See you.
Thank you.